Okay, so here we're picking up on the bone for the, again, this is a specialized connective tissue, and it is supportive connective tissue. So here we have 3 different cell types you find. They're still found in these spaces. Bone has a very unique organization, as you see here. Often looks like the trees, right? The tree rings that you think of. And this, of course, is structural integrity and support here. That's the basis of it, is your organization. So the whole column, and these are many, many tiny columns in this bone, is called an osteon. It's, again, lacunae is a space that each cell lives in or resides in. Central canals are found in the middle of an osteon. Lamellae is the layers of matrix, right, the rock around there. And then canaliculi are these little spaces where processes from the cells basically move through. So the cells kind of look like these little bugs that they're actually, or the tissue itself looks like it's fractured, but this is actually these processes from the cells just moving through and connecting with other cells. So clearly this gives us strength and support, protection, muscles attached to it, hence the name skeletal muscle, and blood cell production is done by your bone. Alright, so fluid connective tissue, blood, right? You use hemo or hemato roots, and of course, and lymph is again a fluid. So extracellular matrix and lymph comes from blood. In fact, really, all the fluids in your body come from blood. Extracellular matrix, this one is liquid, hence the fluid, and that is called plasma. The cells in here are erythrocytes, leukocytes, thrombocytes, right? Most of them are erythrocytes or red cells. This is going to move things, well, I shouldn't say move because that's muscle, right? It transports, right? It's like a river flowing through your body. So it transports. We have some white cells in here. This is a lymphocyte in this case that defend you, and they regulate things like pH and temperature. Okay, the third type of tissue is muscle. M for M. This is a tissue that moves things, and this is the only tissue that moves things. So please be very careful with that. Muscle has a few other characteristics unique to it that helps separate it from connective and epithelial. It's excitable, so it can respond to electrical stimuli, and it's contractile. So this is the only tissue we're going to talk about that actually can do contractions. It is controlled, right? This excitation and contraction are controlled, and the control varies, right, for the muscle types. There's 3 of these: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. But we say it's voluntary if we are initiating, if our brain is initiating the command and we are aware of it. It's involuntary if our brain, we're unaware of the command being initiated by the brain or spinal cord. So skeletal muscle, we'll spend a whole chapter talking about this. Beautiful tissue, right? Multinucleated, so these are single long cells, right? So they're not very wide. Here's the width of the cell, they're also called fibers, and inside the cytoplasm are all these proteins, which are organized very consistently, and the proteins are actin and myosin. So they give this kind of striped appearance, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light to it. So we call this striated muscle. All right. The nuclei are towards the outer part of the cell. Right? So one cell ends here, another begins here. And again, we have these, while the whole cell is called a fiber, inside are going to be a whole lot of other organization that we're going to talk about when we get to muscle, the chapter on muscle. So skeletal muscle gives us locomotion. It's 40% of our body mass, found attached to, right, the bones, all over the body, in the middle, right, sandwiched between the skin and the organs. It is normally voluntarily controlled. So your brain tells this muscle to begin to get excited and contract, and controls the contraction. It's striate again and long, cylindrical, with many, many nuclei. In contrast to smooth muscle, which doesn't have the same pattern of proteins, actin and myosin, and so is called smooth, right? These are usually have one nucleus. They are spindle-shaped, and they kind of bundle like this. These are still movers because it's muscle, but this time they are surrounding the tubes. They're in the walls of the tubes, our blood vessels, our digestive tract, our respiratory tract, our urogenital tract. And these are going to be involuntarily controlled. We are not going to be aware of the brain signaling or telling them to start moving something. All right, cardiac is kind of between skeletal and smooth. So it's typically, again, single nuclei in the cell, so like smooth, but like the skeletal, it is striated, right? You can see the light, dark in these cells. There's nuclei. So actin and myosin have a regular pattern. Contraction is very much the same. Cardiac, though, has these additional features. So what these are is these are junctions. They're cell junctions. So remember how we talked about that in video 1 about, right, the anchoring junctions and the tight junctions and the gap junctions. Well, here where these two cells are coming together, this cell and this cell, these are called intercalated discs, and they consist of desmosomes, anchoring junctions, and gap junctions. So it's a very thick area because there's a lot of reinforced proteins in there. So cardiac muscle moves blood. That's its sole job, all right? And it is involuntary, like smooth as well. So your brain is not telling your heart to do its contraction. And it often has, like I said, you have these branching that goes on and doesn't look as organized as skeletal, though it is striated. All right, our last main tissue type is nervous tissue. All right, so what functions are left? Because we have movement covered with muscle, we have protection, connection, cushioning, right? Some transport with connective tissue, and we have absorbing and secreting and protecting with epithelial. So what's left? Well, basically the ability to sense something and then direct. And now, ooh, there's another typo. So sorry. All right, so in nervous tissue, you have the specialized cells that are going to be able to start an action potential, and they're going to send it to the central nervous system, where we're going to perceive what that means. The central nervous system is going to take that information with other bits of information coming in from other sensors, and they're going to direct responses. So this, like muscle, is highly excitable, but this tissue starts the action potentials. They initiate them. All right, so again, special looking cells to do that job. They're like long wires. Lots of processes around the cell to make contacts with other cells. So in neural tissue, you see neurons and neuroglia. Now, neuroglia far outnumber the neurons, but the neurons are the ones that are really doing these starting action potentials and sending them. So the neurons tend to be a lot larger, right? Some of the neuroglia are actually part of the neuron, like when we talk about myelin sheaths and Schwann cells, right? So the neuroglia, again, they help maintain the nerve cells, the neurons, and they insulate them too. Okay, so insulate so that the action potentials the electricity does not leak away. Right? The neurons themselves consist of a cell body, right? Dendrites, which are these long branching processes, and these dendrites, basically, this is directional, they would hook to another neuron, and they would receive the action potential from other neurons. They then send an action potential on through a singular axon, and these, right, then would contact other. So this might make a contact with these, right, dendrites here. All right, the last thing that we want to talk about in here is the idea of injury to the tissues and how do we regenerate tissue. Because if we don't, we already said you have ulceration and then you're liable to get an infection and die from that. So anytime tissue is injured, the response by the body is called inflammation. Now there are other things the body does as well, but inflammation is standard response. All right. So inflammation, basically, the cardinal signs of this are, redness, heat, swelling, and pain. So we want to think about those signs, what what they indicate is happening. All right. Now, inflammation is there, right? This is our response to control the damage, to contain the damage and the microbes that come in with it, to clean up the damaged cells and bacteria that might have invaded, and then replace the cells that were lost. So we're able to limit the injury with inflammation. We try to eliminate the cause of the injury, right? Be that, a bacterial or parasite or some other invading thing. And inflammation helps to start the repair and regeneration, so the mitosis that we need for the cells, the neighboring cells that are still alive and intact. Okay? So again, the 4 cardinal signs, redness, heat, swelling, and pain, come from the fact that the process of inflammation, the injured cells release a whole lot of chemicals. And the chemicals basically signal their neighbors to, and the neighboring blood vessels to dilate, so more blood is flowing into the area, which means there'll be more heat because your blood carries heat. They signal the cells of the blood vessels and other cells to become kind of leaky. We say more permeable. So fluids move out of the blood, and of course also defenders move out of the blood. So this leakiness is very, very important. So we get swelling, right? And of course when we swell, we generally put pressure on nearby nerves, so we get pain. All right? Acute versus chronic. So acute is a short-term inflammation that's generally very healthy and a very positive response to injury. Chronic inflammation is not, where you're going on and you have this maintained level of response, which is stressing the body. All right. So why might you scar? You might scar because you basically can't get the epithelial cells, right, your first contact, to divide fast enough to seal off the injury. So if you have a large enough injury, it's a trade-off, right? You don't want to stay open to the outside world. Remember, epithelial is protecting you. And so, but you can't get enough epithelial cells produced fast enough, but you can produce protein fibers like collagen very quickly, right, in seconds. And so the trade-off is you may not get back your functional cells, but you will maintain a barrier. Okay? And tissue and aging, right? There aren't many things that improve with age. We got to be honest. We have variable senescence. Again, this has to do with aging, that period of time senescence, kind of settling down, if you will, right? Due to our genes and the way we've lived our lives, right? So in other words, we all age differently. What you see typically is deterioration of the tissues. Again, the cells can't undergo mitosis as easily anymore. The cells are not as good at making proteins like elastin, and the elastin and the collagen wear out, so you get wrinkles, right? And of course your hearing is affected when you lose elastin, your eyesight, blood pressure, all are the result of elastin decreasing because your cells are not very good at producing it. Your bone deteriorates a little, muscle, nervous tissue, you lose sensation a lot of times, so the sensors that are in the extremities, your hands and skin, they wear out and aren't replaced, and you lose muscle as well. So ultimately, this is a homeostatic imbalance. So you really are no longer in balance, but we're willing to live that way. Our ability to repair and replace doesn't keep up with the loss of our cells and proteins, and so we see the signs of that in aging. All right, tissues and cancer, right? The number one predictor of cancer is, of course, age, and this is due to the accumulation of mutations. And mutations just occur in our sequence, our gene sequence, over time. It's a natural process, regrettably, but change is necessary. So tumors, which begin as a mutation in the control of cell cycles, so you have, again, proto-oncogenes and you have tumor suppressor genes, and if they are not functioning, or they become mutated, in other words, then you can't control cell cycle anymore. Right? And so you end up with tumors. Now, tumors are not functional. That's the big problem. They show up, but they crowd out the functional cells. Cancer can start with any dividing cell, but the most common, again, are epithelial, as I said, or connective. All right? And that's because these are cells that maintain their ability to divide throughout life. Your treatment depends on what the cancer, how it origined. All right.